A billionaire's fortune could move mountains, but it couldn't heal his broken son. Inside the cold, echoing halls of Greystone Manor, silence ruled like a curse. Walter Harrington, a man whose empire stretched across continents, whose name gleamed on skyscrapers, could buy anything except one thing: his paralyzed son's smile. Michael had once been a fearless boy, full of light. But a single tragic accident had taken his mother, stolen his laughter, and dimmed his will to live. Doctors came, therapists tried, millions of dollars flowed like water, but nothing worked. The mansion became less of a home and more of a tomb, a shrine of sorrow where joy had been locked away. And then an intruder appeared. Not a healer, not a genius doctor, not a miracle worker. She was only 10 years old, barefoot, with messy blonde hair and a sparkle in her eyes. The maid's little girl, a child with a gift no one saw coming, a gift that would soon shatter the silence of Greystone Manor. Her next choice would uncover a bond buried for generations and change the Harrington family forever. But before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing this community from all around the world, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss tomorrow's story. Now, let's begin. A little girl's secret was hidden in her dancing feet, and when she stepped into Michael's world, everything began to change. A billionaire's empire could command the world, but it couldn't heal his son. Walter Harrington was a man whose name gleamed on skyscrapers, carved into tankers that sailed oceans, whispered in boardrooms from New York to Shanghai. He could bend markets, build empires, and topple competitors with a single call. To the world, he was untouchable, a modern king seated on a throne of glass and steel 90 stories above the city. But in Greystone Manor, all his power was meaningless. Behind the polished gates and marble halls lived his greatest treasure and his deepest failure, his son, Michael. Just a year earlier, Michael had been a fearless boy of 10, chasing butterflies across endless lawns, climbing the old oak trees, laughing with the kind of joy Walter secretly envied. But a single rainy night had taken everything: a slick road, a tragic crash. Catherine, Walter's beloved wife, was gone. Michael survived, but paralyzed, broken, and silent. Doctors called it a spinal injury. Walter knew it was more. The boy who returned home was a shell. No laughter, no curiosity, only a vacant stare out the window, watching a world he could no longer run in. Walter, the man who could buy anything, couldn't buy back his son's smile. He tried. Private jets flew in the best neurosurgeons, therapists, psychologists. They spoke in complicated terms, took their checks, and left. He filled Michael's room with technology, voice controls, massive screens, endless games, but they sat untouched, gathering dust. Greystone became a shrine of silence, a tomb of sorrow where joy was buried. And then, one ordinary day, life slipped quietly through the back door. Eleanor Vance, a new maid, worked the halls with quiet dignity. She had known hardship, carried it in her tired eyes, but her kindness never dimmed. This job was survival, the roof above her daughter's head. Her daughter, Abby, was 10, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, full of restless life. Where the mansion was silent, she hummed. Where the air was heavy, she fidgeted. She was life itself, in small, unpolished form. Normally, Abby was at school. But today, a burst pipe had closed the classrooms, and Eleanor had no choice but to bring her along. She gave strict orders. Stay in the staff kitchen. Don't touch anything. Don't make a sound. For 2 hours, Abby obeyed. But silence pressed in on her, suffocating. She had heard whispers of the boy in the chair. Her mother told her never to disturb him. But Abby's heart, a thing of pure empathy, couldn't imagine someone her age sitting alone all day. Quiet as a mouse, she crept from the kitchen. Sunlight poured through tall windows, painting the halls in gold. Dust floated like tiny fairies. At the end of a corridor, glass doors opened to a garden. And there he was, Michael, pale, still, slumped in a wheelchair that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. His eyes were fixed somewhere far away beyond roses and fountains, where Abby could not follow. A tray of untouched food sat beside him. Her chest tightened. He looked so empty. And then she remembered her secret. Abby had no riches, no medicine. But she had something else. A gift she kept for sad days. When her belly ached with hunger, when her mother's eyes grew tired, she would dance. Not a trained, polished dance, but a silly, wiggly language of joy that reminded her there was still light in the dark. She took a breath, heart pounding. Then she stepped into the sunlight and began. At first, small, a wiggle of her hips, a comical march, a spin, hair fanning out like a halo. She pulled faces, crossed her eyes, flopped like a penguin. She was ridiculous, unashamed, pure joy. Michael didn't move. His gaze stayed distant. Her heart sank. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she should run. But then, something. A flicker. His eyes shifted. Confusion, then focus. He saw her. Abby pushed harder. She became a robot, stiff and jerky, a ballerina twirling, until dizzy, a chicken flapping wildly across the lawn. And then it happened. A sound. Fragile, faint, but unmistakable. A laugh. Michael's mouth twitched into a smile. His fingers trembled against the armrest. Then another laugh, fuller this time, breaking through like sunlight after endless rain. For the first time in 387 days, laughter filled Greystone Manor. Abby's heart soared. She bowed dramatically, grinning wide. She had done it. She had broken the silence. Neither child saw the tall figure standing in the doorway. Walter Harrington had heard it. The sound he thought he'd never hear again. Laughter. He froze, breath caught in his throat. He stepped closer, expecting to find some expensive therapist at work. Instead, his eyes landed on the impossible. His son, alive with joy, smiling at a barefoot little girl dancing on his lawn. His first instinct was fury. How dare she intrude? How dare this child trespass into grief he had built walls around? His thumb hovered over his phone, ready to fire her mother, throw them out. But then, he looked at Michael, and for the first time in a year, his boy was alive. Walter Harrington had spent fortunes chasing miracles, yet nothing could restore his son. For months, the halls of Greystone Manor echoed with silence, a cruel reminder of what had been lost. Doctors, specialists, and therapies had all failed, leaving Michael trapped in stillness, his once bright laughter extinguished. Walter, a man accustomed to solutions bought with money and power, had surrendered to despair. That surrender began to crumble the moment he saw his son clap. It happened so suddenly that Walter thought his eyes were deceiving him. Michael's limp hands were moving together, slowly, clumsily, but deliberately. His back, usually hunched in defeat, straightened as his gaze fixed on the small girl spinning and tumbling across the lawn. Then came the sound, Michael's laughter. Fragile at first, then fuller, carrying life back into the boy Walter had believed lost forever. Walter had poured millions into a void and received nothing in return. Yet this barefoot child, with no credentials or resources, had done the impossible in mere minutes. She had reached his son. Hidden behind the stone pillar, Walter's fury dissolved into something unfamiliar. His chest tightened, not with rage, but with a fragile, dangerous hope. He watched as the girl finished her dance with a playful fall, peeked up through the grass, and drew another giggle from Michael. When she introduced herself as Abby, and Michael answered, Walter nearly staggered. His son, silent for months, had spoken. A whole sentence freely given to a maid's daughter. Walter, a man who measured worth in empires, was humbled in a way he had never imagined. The next day, the silence returned. Abby was gone, and Michael once again sat like a statue by the window. But Walter could not shake what he had seen. He spent the morning pacing, the memory of laughter gnawing at him. Logic told him it was a fluke. Pride insisted he ignore it. Yet the father, buried under years of power and armor, screamed at him to act. At the same time, Eleanor Vance, Abby's mother, lived in fear. The housekeeper had scolded her about Abby wandering. Terrified of losing their livelihood, Eleanor scolded her daughter, only to hear Abby's soft protest. I just wanted to make him smile. That single sentence shattered Eleanor's anger, replacing it with quiet sorrow. By afternoon, Walter's restraint snapped. For the first time in years, he descended into the kitchen, startling the staff with his presence, his gaze fixed on Eleanor, who braced for dismissal. Instead, Walter asked for her daughter. Confusion and dread swirled in Eleanor's chest as she led Abby to the garden. There, Michael sat among the roses, his face brightening the instant he saw the little girl. Walter saw it too, the shift, the spark, undeniable. He demanded an explanation from Abby, his tone sharp. Why had she danced? Her reply was simple, innocent yet profound. Because he looked lonely. Dancing makes things better. Her words, free of pretense, pierced Walter's defenses. He challenged her with cold logic, dismissing her movements as trivial compared to the work of the world's best doctors. But Abby, steady and fearless, explained sadness like a heavy blanket that could not be bought away, only lifted by sunshine, by laughter. Walter, speechless, looked at his son and then back at her. The armor of a billionaire crumbled before the wisdom of a child. He exhaled, surrendering the battle he hadn't realized he was fighting. Fine, he said quietly. Dance. And so Abby did. She danced like a buzzing bumblebee, a toy soldier, even a monkey at Michael's request. The garden filled with Michael's laughter, real, joyous, unrestrained. Walter stood by, no longer the empire builder, but simply a father, watching a miracle unfold. When Abby finally collapsed in giggles of her own, Walter spoke firmly, but without anger. Abby would be permitted in the garden every afternoon, from 3 to 4. Eleanor's protests died on her lips as she saw tears glistening in Walter's eyes before he turned away. From that day forward, Greystone Manor gained a sacred ritual. At 3 o'clock sharp, Abby raced into the garden, her imagination spilling into each dance. Michael, who once counted the hours in silence, now waited eagerly for her arrival. The boy's laughter, once a fragile spark, grew stronger, echoing through the estate like a forgotten melody. And every day, though he told himself it was just to supervise, Walter lingered by the open doors of his study. The titan of industry had learned a truth that money could never buy. Sometimes the smallest hearts carried the greatest miracles. Walter often stood at the window, hidden behind the curtain, watching. He noticed how Michael's posture was changing, his back straighter, his head higher, his hands more active than they had been in months. What began as silly dances soon transformed into something deeper. Friendship. After one exhausting performance where Abby pretended to melt like a snowman, she collapsed on the grass beside Michael's chair. Michael, his voice clearer than it had been in a year, declared it her best one yet. Abby, catching her breath, asked what she should be tomorrow. Michael thought for a moment, then requested a brave knight fighting a dragon. Abby's eyes sparkled. She pulled a small worn photograph from her pocket and showed him her great-grandfather, Sergeant Franklin Vance, a soldier her mother described as a hero. She told Michael how Franklin had once said that bravery didn't mean you weren't scared. It meant doing the right thing even with shaking knees. Michael studied the photograph, fascinated. He had grown up surrounded by images of powerful businessmen, but this man looked strong in a way that had nothing to do with money. Abby's stories quickly became part of their ritual. The first half hour was for dance, the second for tales of Sergeant Vance, stories of courage, kindness, and sacrifice. Michael listened like his life depended on it, and slowly, something shifted. His therapist, David, noticed it too. One day during hand exercises, Michael pushed far beyond his limits, squeezing a rubber ball 15 times when he could barely manage 5 before. Inspired by Abby's story of Franklin holding a frozen wire in battle, Michael whispered, "You just have to squeeze tighter." The progress shocked the medical staff. His doctor called Walter, astonished at improvements science couldn't explain. Walter knew the truth. He was allowing a 10-year-old girl to do what millions of dollars had failed to achieve. But the fragile miracle drew criticism. One afternoon, his business partner George visited. When laughter floated in from the garden, George scoffed at the sight of a billionaire's son entertained by a maid's daughter, calling it undignified. Walter, once a man ruled by pride, turned to him with steel in his voice. "What people say hasn't made my son laugh. That little girl has done more than doctors I paid $3 million for. If you can't accept it, leave." George, stunned, fell silent. That evening, Walter finally spoke with Eleanor Vance. He mentioned Abby's stories about her great-grandfather. Eleanor, nervous at first, softened as she described Franklin's bravery and her desire to pass on a legacy of character, not wealth. To her surprise, Walter's voice was gentle. "On the contrary, Mrs. Vance, I believe those stories are helping my son immensely. Thank you." As days passed, Abby and Michael grew inseparable. She told him stories, he shared secrets, and laughter returned to Greystone Manor. Eleanor watched with both pride and fear, knowing their world was fragile. One day the Harringtons might move on, and Abby, who had poured her heart into healing Michael, could be left behind. Quietly, Eleanor began saving every dollar Walter paid her, bracing for the day she would need to mend her daughter's broken heart. In the fading light of another evening, Abby told Michael one of her favorite tales, how Sergeant Franklin led his platoon through freezing mud to escape enemy eyes. Michael listened wide-eyed. "He wasn't scared?" he whispered. Abby shook her head with a smile. "Oh, he was terrified. But being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going anyway." And for the first time in a long time, Michael believed he could. Michael sat staring at his useless legs beneath the blanket, feeling as if they were an enemy field he would never cross. The doctors had told him his nerves weren't severed, that with enough will he might one day stand again. But for so long, fear had been stronger than hope. Then Abby's story came back to him, her great-grandfather crawling through mud, his teeth chattering so loud he feared the enemy might hear. Yet he kept moving forward, because bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was action in spite of it. Michael swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he turned to Abby. "I want to try something," he said. She looked at him with wide, concerned eyes. "I want to try to stand." From his study, Walter froze. His son's voice, filled with determination, carried across the garden. Heart pounding, he rushed silently to the doorway. He saw Michael's pale, sweat-soaked face, and Abby at his side, holding his hand tightly. "Just don't let me fall," he whispered. Abby nodded. Michael planted his hands on the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning white. He pushed. His arms shook violently, despair whispering that it was useless. But Abby leaned in close. "Think of the mud, Michael. You're scared, but you have to be brave." Michael shut his eyes and pushed again, releasing a cry that was part pain and part pure will. And then it happened. Slowly, his hips lifted, his trembling legs pressed against the ground. Inch by inch, impossibly, he rose. For the first time in over a year, Michael was standing. Abby gasped, tears filling her eyes, but she never let go of his hand. Walter gripped the stone pillar to keep from collapsing. His son was standing. His son was fighting. For 3 trembling seconds, Michael held his weight, then fell back into the chair drenched in sweat. Abby threw her arms around him, laughing through tears. "You did it! You stood!" Michael wept and laughed all at once. Walter slid to his knees outside the doorway, sobbing harder than he had in years. All his wealth, all his power, had never achieved this. It wasn't money or medicine that had brought his son back. It was the kindness of a little girl. He finally rose, wiping his face, and stepped onto the patio. Abby instinctively moved back, her hand protectively on Michael's shoulder. Walter looked at his son's glowing face, alive again. For the first time in a year, he didn't see a patient. He saw his boy. "I saw that," Walter said, his voice raw. Michael gave him a weak smile. "Abby helped me." Walter turned to the girl in her grass-stained dress and whispered the words that cost him his pride. "Thank you." But Walter's gratitude could not stop there. Days later, he sat in his library with a letter unearthed by his investigator. It was a wartime report describing Sergeant Franklin Vance, Abby's great-grandfather, leading a desperate charge under enemy fire. The sergeant had shielded a wounded private with his own body, saving his life and turning the tide of battle. Walter's hand shook as he read the name, Private Stephen Harrington. His father, the empire he had built, his fortune, even Michael's very existence, all of it had been made possible by Abby's ancestor. A debt that had lain hidden for decades was now repaid by a barefoot child dancing on his lawn. That evening, Walter gathered Eleanor and Abby in the library. With Michael at the fire, he read the captain's letter aloud. Eleanor gasped when she heard the name Harrington. Walter's voice broke as he explained, "My family owes yours everything. My father's life, my son's life, my own existence. All of it is because of Franklin Vance." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. Abby sat stunned. Walter continued, "I cannot repay a life with a life, but I can honor his legacy." He announced the creation of the Sergeant Franklin Vance Foundation, dedicated to veterans' families. Then, turning to Eleanor, he said softly, "This is no longer your place of work. The carriage house by the lake is yours, rent-free, forever." Finally, he faced Abby. "And you, Abby Vance, will be Michael's friend for as long as you both live. You are not the maid's daughter. You are family." From that day forward, Greystone Manor was transformed. It no longer echoed with silence, but rang with children's laughter. Eleanor became the respected administrator of the Vance Foundation. Abby and Michael grew inseparable, their friendship a light that healed wounds no medicine could touch. Months later, Walter stood on the patio, watching Michael take halting steps across the lawn with a walker, Abby cheering him on. Eleanor slipped her hand into his, no longer maid and master, but equals, bound by gratitude and love. Walter finally understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't the skyscrapers with his name, or the empire he had built. True riches were, here, in his son's laughter, in a little girl's courage, and in a debt of kindness that had traveled through generations to heal them all.